October 7th, 1944. The war in Europe had reached a fever pitch. The Allies were pressing hard into German territory, their bombers thundering across the skies in relentless waves. Escorting those bombers were the sleek, deadly P-51 Mustangs, aircraft that had already earned a reputation as the scourge of the Luftwaffe. Among them was a young pilot from Detroit, Urban Ben Drew, strapped into his beloved Mustang, the Detroit Miss. Drew was only 23 years old, but he had already seen enough of war to understand its brutality. The Mustang's cockpit was his world. The roar of the Merlin engine, the vibration of the fuselage, the smell of oil and gunpowder. On that morning, his mission was straightforward: protect the bombers, keep the Luftwaffe at bay, and return home alive. But fate had other plans. As the formation pushed deeper into German airspace, Drew's sharp eyes caught movement on the horizon. At first, it was just a glimmer, a faint shimmer against the pale autumn sky. Then the shapes resolved into aircraft, dozens of them. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, the backbone of Germany's fighter force. He counted quickly. 10, 15, 20, 30. 30 enemy fighters circling like predators, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Most pilots would have radioed for help or tightened formation with their wingmen, but Drew was alone. His wingman had turned back earlier with mechanical trouble, leaving him to fly solo. Now 30 German fighters stood between him and survival. The odds were impossible. One Mustang against 30 Luftwaffe machines. Yet Drew felt no panic. Instead, a strange calm settled over him. He had trained for this moment, drilled endlessly in dogfighting maneuvers, and trusted the Mustang's speed and agility. He knew the Germans were desperate, their fuel supplies dwindling, their pilots younger and less experienced. But desperation could make them dangerous. He pushed the throttle forward, the Merlin engine screaming as the Mustang surged ahead. The Germans spotted him, breaking formation to intercept. Drew's heart pounded, but his mind was razor sharp. He whispered to himself, "Let's see what Detroit can do." The first clash came fast. A Messerschmitt dove straight at him, guns blazing. Drew rolled hard, the tracer slicing past his canopy. He pulled into a climbing turn, forcing the German to overshoot. In an instant, he reversed, lined up his sights, and squeezed the trigger. The Mustang's 6.5 caliber Brownings roared, spitting fire. The Messerschmitt shuddered, smoke pouring from its engine, before spiraling into the earth below. One down, 29 to go. But Drew had no time to celebrate. 2 more Germans closed in from behind, their cannons flashing. He yanked the stick, diving into a split S maneuver, the Mustang screaming as it plummeted. The G-forces pressed him into his seat, his vision narrowing. At the last moment, he leveled out, skimming the treetops. The Germans followed, but the Mustang's Mustang was faster. He pulled up sharply, looped behind them, and fired. Another German fighter exploded in flames. The sky became chaos. Contrails twisted, engines roared, and tracers lit the air like fireworks. Drew was everywhere at once, climbing, diving, rolling, firing. His Mustang seemed alive, responding to every touch of the controls. The Germans tried to swarm him, but he refused to be cornered. He fought like a man possessed, each maneuver precise, each shot deadly. By the end of the first 10 minutes, Drew had already downed multiple aircraft. The Germans were stunned. They had expected an easy kill, a lone Mustang overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Instead, they faced a whirlwind of steel and fury. Drew's courage and skill turned the impossible into reality. This was not just a dogfight. It was a duel between one man's willpower and an entire squadron's might. And as the battle raged, Drew's legend began to take shape. The day a single P-51 pilot took on 30 German fighters and won. The sky above Germany was no longer a battlefield. It was a storm. Contrails twisted like torn clouds, engines screamed, and the thunder of gunfire echoed across the heavens. Urban Ben Drew, strapped into his P-51 Mustang, was at the center of it all. 30 German fighters had descended upon him, and yet he fought with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a warrior. The Luftwaffe pilots were stunned. They had expected an easy kill, a lone Mustang overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Instead, they found themselves locked in a duel with a man who refused to die. Drew's Mustang darted through the sky like a hawk, climbing, diving, rolling, and firing with uncanny accuracy. Each maneuver was calculated, each burst of gunfire deadly. One German pilot later recalled the shock of seeing Drew's Mustang appear out of nowhere, guns blazing, before disappearing into the clouds. "He fought like a ghost," the pilot admitted. "We could not catch him." Drew's strategy was simple but brilliant. Never stay still, never let the enemy surround him, and always strike from an angle they did not expect. He used the Mustang's superior speed to climb above the Germans, then dove down in slashing attacks, firing short, controlled bursts. He never lingered, never give them time to aim. The Germans tried to adapt. They spread out, attempting to box him in, but Drew anticipated their moves, slipping through gaps, rolling inverted, and diving away. His Mustang seemed alive, responding to his every touch. The Merlin engine roared like a beast, carrying him through maneuvers that pushed the limits of human endurance. At one point, Drew found himself head-to-head with a Messerschmitt. The German opened fire, tracers slicing past his canopy. Drew held steady, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, with a flick of the wrist, he rolled inverted, dropped beneath the German's line of fire, and pulled up behind him. The Mustang's guns thundered, and the Messerschmitt exploded in flames. Another German tried to dive away, hoping to escape. Drew chased him, the Mustang's nose steady, his finger tight on the trigger. The German twisted, rolled, and climbed, but Drew stayed glued to his tail. Finally, the Mustang's guns roared, and the German fighter disintegrated in midair. By now, Drew had downed several aircraft. The Germans were rattled. Their numerical advantage meant nothing against his skill and the Mustang's power. They began to break formation, some diving for safety, others climbing desperately to escape. But Drew pursued them relentlessly, his determination unshakable. The battle became a deadly dance. Drew moved with instinct, his mind calculating angles, speeds, and trajectories in split seconds. He was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting to prove that courage and skill could overcome impossible odds. Every kill added to his legend. Every maneuver defied the laws of probability. The Luftwaffe pilots, hardened by years of war, realized that they were facing something extraordinary. One man, one Mustang, against 30 fighters, and he was winning. The storm raged on, but Drew remained unbroken. His Mustang carved the sky, leaving trails of smoke and fire in its wake. The Germans had thrown everything at him, but he refused to yield. This was not just a battle. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a pilot who believed that no odds were too great, no enemy too strong, and no fight unwinnable. The battle had raged for nearly 20 minutes, and the sky was littered with smoke, fire, and falling wreckage. Urban Ben Drew's Mustang, the Detroit Miss, had already claimed several German fighters, but the odds remained staggering. 20-plus Luftwaffe aircraft still circled, determined to bring him down. Drew's body was pushed to its limits. The G-forces strained his muscles, his vision blurred at the edges, and sweat poured down his face. Yet his mind remained sharp, calculating every move with the precision of a chess master. He knew that survival depended on rhythm: attack, evade, reposition, and strike again. The Germans were growing frustrated. Their numerical advantage had been shattered by Drew's relentless maneuvers. They tried to swarm him, diving from above and below, but he refused to be trapped. Each time they closed in, he slipped through their grasp, rolling inverted, diving into the clouds or climbing into the sun. One German ace, a veteran of the Eastern Front, decided to confront Drew head-on. He dove straight at the Mustang, cannons blazing. Drew held steady, waiting until the last possible moment. Then, with a sudden snap roll, he slid beneath the German's line of fire, pulled up sharply, and unleashed a burst of .50 caliber rounds. The German fighter erupted in flames, its wings tearing apart as it spiraled downward. The Luftwaffe pilots were stunned. This was not supposed to happen. One man was not supposed to defy 30. Yet Drew's courage was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. As the fight dragged on, Drew began to sense a shift. The Germans were losing cohesion. Their attacks became disorganized, their formations sloppy. Fear had crept into their ranks. They were no longer hunters, they were prey. Drew pressed the advantage. He climbed high, then dove into the thick of them, guns blazing. Another Messerschmitt disintegrated under his fire. A Focke-Wulf tried to escape, but Drew chased it relentlessly, his Mustang glued to its tail. With a final burst, the German fighter exploded, scattering debris across the sky. By now, Drew had downed multiple aircraft, and the survivors were shaken. Some tried to flee, diving for the safety of the clouds. Others fought desperately, but their attacks lacked conviction. Drew's ferocity had broken their spirit. The turning point had arrived. What began as a hopeless duel was now a battle Drew could win. His Mustang roared through the chaos, a symbol of defiance and courage. Each kill added to his legend, each maneuver defied the odds. The Luftwaffe pilots would later admit that they had faced something extraordinary that day. One man, one Mustang, against 30 fighters, and he was winning. For Drew, there was no time to reflect. The battle was not over. His ammunition was running low, his fuel dwindling, and the Germans still outnumbered him. Yet he refused to yield. He had come this far, and he would see it through to the end. The storm raged on, but Drew remained unbroken. His Mustang carved the sky, leaving trails of smoke and fire in its wake. The day was far from finished, but the tide had turned. Courage had triumphed over chaos, and the impossible was becoming reality. The sky was a graveyard of burning wrecks. Smoke trails twisted downward, black scars against the pale autumn clouds. Urban Ben Drew's Mustang, the Detroit Miss, had already carved its legend into the heavens. Several German fighters had fallen to his guns, and yet the battle raged on. The Luftwaffe pilots were shaken. They had entered the fight with confidence, 30 against 1 certain of victory. But now their formations were broken, their morale shattered. Each time they tried to regroup, Drew struck like lightning, diving from above or slashing through their ranks with deadly precision. Fear spread among them. Some pilots began to break away, diving for the safety of the clouds. Others fought desperately, but their attacks lacked conviction. They were no longer predators, they were prey. Drew sensed the shift. He pressed the advantage, climbing high into the sun, then diving down with guns blazing. Another Messerschmitt burst into flames, its pilot bailing out too late. A Focke-Wulf tried to escape, but Drew chased it relentlessly, his Mustang glued to its tail. With a final burst, the German fighter disintegrated, scattering debris across the sky. The Germans were stunned. This was not supposed to happen. One man was not supposed to defy 30, yet Drew's courage was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. The battle became a test of endurance. Drew's ammunition was running low, his fuel dwindling, and his body strained by the relentless G-forces. Yet he refused to yield. Each maneuver was executed with precision, each shot fired with deadly intent. The Luftwaffe pilots, hardened by years of war, realized they were facing something extraordinary. One man, one Mustang, against 30 fighters, and he was winning. For Drew, there was no time to reflect. The battle was not over. His Mustang roared through the chaos, leaving trails of smoke and fire in its wake. The day was far from finished, but the tide had turned. Courage had triumphed over chaos, and the impossible was becoming reality. Later, historians would look back on this battle as one of the most astonishing duels in the history of aerial warfare. Drew's victory was not just a triumph of skill, it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a pilot who refused to surrender, no matter the odds. The Luftwaffe had thrown everything at him, but he remained unbroken. His Mustang carved the sky, a symbol of defiance and courage. The legend of Ben Drew was born that day, etched forever into the annals of history. The battle had stretched beyond imagination. For nearly half an hour, Urban Ben Drew had fought alone against 30 German fighters. His Mustang, the Detroit Miss, bore the scars of combat. Bullet holes along the fuselage, smoke trailing faintly from the engine, and the smell of cordite thick in the cockpit. Yet Drew remained unbroken. His ammunition was dangerously low. Each burst of fire had to count. He could no longer afford long sprays of bullets. Instead, he fired in short, precise bursts, conserving every round. His fuel gauge dipped lower, a grim reminder that time was running out. But Drew refused to retreat. He had already defied the odds, and now he was determined to finish what he had started. The Luftwaffe pilots were exhausted. Their initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by fear and disbelief. They had thrown everything at him: dives, climbs, coordinated attacks. But Drew had countered them all. His Mustang moved like a phantom, striking from unexpected angles, vanishing into clouds, then reappearing with guns blazing. One German pilot, desperate to end the duel, dove straight at Drew in a head-on attack. The sky lit up with tracers as both aircraft fired. Drew held steady, waiting until the last possible moment. Then, with a flick of the wrist, he rolled inverted, dropped beneath the German's line of fire, and pulled up behind him. The Mustang's guns thundered, and the German fighter exploded in a ball of flame. Another German fighter pilot tried to escape, diving for the safety of the clouds. Drew chased him relentlessly, his Mustang glued to the German's tail. The German twisted, rolled, and climbed, but Drew stayed locked on. With a final burst, the German fighter disintegrated, scattering debris across the sky. By now, Drew had downed multiple aircraft, and the survivors were shaken. Some tried to flee, diving for safety. Others fought desperately, but their attacks lacked conviction. Drew's ferocity had broken their spirit. The turning point had arrived. What began as a hopeless duel was now a battle Drew could win. His Mustang roared through the chaos, a symbol of defiance and courage. Each kill added to his legend. Each maneuver defied the odds. The Luftwaffe pilots would later admit that they had faced something extraordinary that day. One man, one Mustang against 30 fighters, and he was winning. For Drew, there was no time to reflect. The battle was not over. His ammunition was nearly gone, his fuel dangerously low, and the Germans still outnumbered him. Yet he refused to yield. He had come this far, and he would see it through to the end. The storm raged on, but Drew remained unbroken. His Mustang carved the sky, leaving trails of smoke and fire in its wake. The day was far from finished, but the tide had turned. Courage triumphed over chaos, and the impossible was becoming reality.
The sky was a canvas of destruction. Trails of smoke crisscrossed the heavens, fragments of burning aircraft tumbled toward the earth, and the roar of engines echoed like thunder. Urban Ben Drew's Mustang, the Detroit Miss, had become a phantom of war, striking, vanishing, and reappearing with deadly precision. By now, Drew had downed multiple German fighters. The Luftwaffe pilots, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, were shaken to their core. Their formations had collapsed, their morale shattered. Some tried to flee, diving into the safety of the clouds. Others fought desperately, but their attacks lacked conviction. They were no longer predators, they were prey. Drew pressed the advantage. He climbed high into the sun, then dove down with guns blazing. Another Messerschmitt burst into flames, its pilot bailing out too late. A Focke-Wulf tried to escape, but Drew chased it relentlessly, his Mustang glued to its tail. With a final burst, the German fighter disintegrated, scattering debris across the sky. The Germans were stunned. This was not supposed to happen. One man was not supposed to defy 30. Yet Drew's courage was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. The battle became a test of endurance. Drew's ammunition was nearly gone, his fuel dangerously low, and his body strained by the relentless G-forces. Yet he refused to yield. Each maneuver was executed with precision, each shot fired with deadly intent. The Luftwaffe pilots, hardened by years of war, realized they were facing something extraordinary. One man, one Mustang against 30, and he was winning.
The roar of engines began to fade. The sky, once alive with chaos, was now eerily quiet. Smoke drifted lazily across the horizon, the remnants of burning aircraft falling toward the earth. Urban Ben Drew's Mustang, battered but unbroken, cut through the silence like a lone survivor. The Luftwaffe had been shattered. What began as 30 fighters circling with confidence had ended in disaster. Drew's relentless courage and skill had broken their formations, destroyed their morale, and sent survivors fleeing into the clouds. The once fearsome German squadron was reduced to wreckage and retreat. Drew's body ached from the strain. His muscles trembled, his vision blurred, and his fuel gauge hovered dangerously low. His ammunition was nearly gone, each burst of fire carefully rationed. Yet he had endured. Against impossible odds, he had fought and survived. The Germans who escaped would later tell stories of the Mustang that refused to die. They spoke of a pilot who seemed untouchable, whose aircraft moved like a phantom, striking from nowhere and vanishing into the clouds. They admitted, with a mix of awe and disbelief, that they had faced something extraordinary. For Drew, the battle was not about glory. It was about survival, about protecting the bombers he had been assigned to escort, and about proving that courage could overcome fear. He had not sought fame, but fame found him. His victory would echo across history, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a pilot who refused to surrender. As he turned his Mustang toward home, the silence of the sky pressed in. The adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion. Yet beneath the fatigue was a quiet pride. He had faced 30 German fighters alone, and won. Later, when historians pieced together the events of that day, they would marvel at the sheer improbability of it. One man, one Mustang against 30 fighters. It was not supposed to happen, and yet it did. The silence after the storm carried its own weight. Drew had survived, but the memory of that battle would never leave him. The faces of the enemy pilots, the explosions, the smoke, they were etched into his mind forever. But history would remember him not for the scars, but for the courage. The day a single P-51 pilot took on 30 German fighters and won became legend. And in that legend, Urban Ben Drew's name would live forever. When Urban Ben Drew finally guided his battered Mustang back toward friendly skies, the silence inside the cockpit was deafening. His fuel gauge hovered near empty, his ammunition nearly gone, and his body was drained from the relentless strain of combat. Yet he had survived. More than that, he had triumphed. The day's battle was unlike anything the air war over Europe had ever seen. One man, one Mustang, against 30 German fighters. It was not supposed to happen, and yet it did. Drew's courage, skill, and sheer determination had turned the impossible into reality. News of the duel spread quickly among Allied squadrons. Pilots whispered about the Detroit-born ace who had fought like a phantom, striking from nowhere and vanishing into the clouds. His legend grew with each retelling, a story of defiance and victory against overwhelming odds. For the Luftwaffe, the battle was a sobering reminder of their decline. Once the masters of the skies, they now faced an enemy whose aircraft outperformed theirs and whose pilots refused to yield. Drew's victory symbolized the turning tide of the air war, the moment when German dominance crumbled and Allied courage soared. Historians would later marvel at the improbability of it all. They studied Drew's maneuvers, his tactics, and the psychology of the fight. They concluded that his victory was not just a matter of skill, but of spirit. He believed he could win, and that belief carried him through the storm. Decades later, Drew's story continues to inspire. It is told in classrooms, in documentaries, and in books about the air war. His Mustang, the Detroit Miss, became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that courage can defy the odds. For Drew himself, the memory of that day never faded. He carried it with him, the faces of the enemy pilots, the explosions, the smoke. But he also carried pride, the knowledge that he had stood alone against 30 fighters and emerged victorious. The legacy of Ben Drew is not just about one battle. It is about the spirit of a generation, the men and women who fought against tyranny with courage and conviction. His story is a testament to the power of determination, the belief that no odds are too great and no fight unwinnable.